In 2023, the United States government spent over $1 trillion just paying interest on money it borrowed years ago, not building bridges, not funding schools, just interest. To put that in perspective, that's more than the entire defense budget of most countries on Earth. And here's the part that should make you uncomfortable. Every single dollar of that interest was paid using money the government doesn't actually have. They borrowed more money to pay the interest on old borrowed money. If you did this with your credit card, your bank would cut you off within months. When governments do it, economists call it debt management, and central bankers call it sustainable fiscal policy. This isn't a story about politicians being irresponsible. It's stranger than that. This is about a system specifically designed to push costs into the future, a machine built to make tomorrow's problem instead of solving today's. And once you see how it works, you can't unsee it. Let's start with a simple question. Why don't governments just raise taxes when they need money? The obvious answer is that voters hate tax increases. That's true, but it's not the whole picture. The real reason is deeper and more mechanical than politics. Governments borrow instead of taxing because borrowing doesn't feel like taking. It feels like choosing. And in the strange world of sovereign debt, choosing to borrow is almost always easier than choosing to tax, even when the math says they're the same thing. Think about it from a politician's perspective. You need $10 billion for infrastructure. Option 1, raise taxes by $10 billion. Your approval rating drops immediately. People see less money in their paychecks next month. They blame you. Option 2, borrow $10 billion by issuing government bonds. No one's paycheck changes, no one protests. The bill comes due in 30 years, long after you've left office. Which would you choose? This isn't a moral failure, it's an incentive structure. And once that structure is in place, it becomes self-reinforcing. Countries that borrow more get comfortable borrowing more. The machinery gets built, the expectations get set, and reversing it becomes almost impossible. Here's how government borrowing actually works, stripped down to the essentials. When a government needs money, it doesn't go to a bank. It issues bonds. A bond is essentially an IOU. The government says, give me $1,000 today, and in 10 years, I'll give you back $1,000, plus 3% interest every year. Investors, banks, mutual funds, even foreign governments buy these bonds because they're considered safe. After all, governments can't go bankrupt the way companies can. Governments control the money supply. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Who buys the most government bonds? In the United States, the biggest buyers are American institutions, banks, mutual funds. Your retirement account probably owns some. But a huge chunk is also bought by foreign governments. Japan holds over $1 trillion in U.S. Treasury bonds. China holds close to that. They're lending America money, and America pays them interest for the privilege. Now here's the mechanism most people miss. When those bonds mature, when the government has to pay back that original $1,000, where does the money come from? You'd think they'd use tax revenue. Sometimes they do, but most of the time they issue new bonds. They borrow new money to pay back old money. It's not a conspiracy, it's just how the system is designed to operate. Economists call this rolling over the debt. It sounds technical and boring. What it actually means is this. The debt never really gets paid off. It just gets passed forward, year after year, administration after administration. The debt doesn't disappear. It grows. And here's the kicker. As long as the economy grows faster than the debt, this system works. If your economy grows by 3% a year and your debt grows by 2% a year, you're technically getting richer relative to what you owe. The debt-to-GDP ratio improves. Everyone stays calm. But if that flips, if the debt grows faster than the economy, the math starts breaking down. And that's where we are now in most developed countries. Let's talk numbers, real numbers. The United States national debt is currently sitting above $34 trillion. Trillion with a T. To put that in human terms, if you spent $1 million every single day, it would take you over 90,000 years to spend $34 trillion. The Roman Empire would still be around. Japan's debt is even more extreme relative to its economy. Their debt-to-GDP ratio is over 250%. That means they owe 2.5 times what their entire economy produces in a year. Italy, France, the UK, all carrying debt levels that would have been considered catastrophic 3 decades ago. So, why hasn't the system collapsed? Why are we not living in some dystopian financial wasteland? 2 reasons. First, interest rates have been historically low for the past 15 years. When you can borrow money at 1 or 2% interest, debt is cheap, manageable. You can keep rolling it over without the interest payments crushing you. But that's changing. Central banks have been raising rates to fight inflation, and when rates go up, the cost of servicing all that old debt goes up too. Remember that $1 trillion in interest the U.S. paid in 2023? That number is growing. Second reason, trust. Government bonds are considered safe because people believe governments will always pay them back. It's a collective agreement. As long as everyone believes it, it's true. But belief is fragile. If investors start doubting whether a government can manage its debt, they demand higher interest rates to compensate for the risk. Higher rates mean higher costs. Higher costs mean more borrowing. It's a spiral. And here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. The only way out of a debt spiral historically is some combination of 3 things: economic growth that outpaces the debt, inflation that erodes the real value of what you owe, or default. Growth is hard to manufacture. Inflation hurts everyone, especially the poor. Default destroys trust and crashes the system. So governments keep borrowing because the alternatives are worse. Now, if you listen to most politicians and central bankers, they'll tell you this is all under control. They'll point to low unemployment, stock markets at record highs. They'll say debt is just a tool like any other. Used responsibly, it builds highways and hospitals and keeps economies humming. And they're not completely wrong. Borrowing to invest in infrastructure or education can generate returns that outweigh the cost. Japan rebuilt itself after World War II using debt. The U.S. funded the interstate highway system with borrowed money. Debt can be productive, but here's the reality check. Most government borrowing today isn't funding new airports or research labs. It's funding existing obligations: Social Security, Medicare, pensions. These aren't investments that generate economic returns. They're promises made decades ago that are coming due now, and the bill is enormous. In the United States, mandatory spending on entitlements and interest already takes up more than 70% of the federal budget. That leaves less and less room for everything else. Defense, education, science, infrastructure, all of it competing for a shrinking slice of the pie. The hype says governments are borrowing to build the future. The reality is they're borrowing to pay for the past. And the gap between those 2 things is widening. So what happens when this system reaches its limit? The optimistic scenario is that technology and productivity growth save us. AI, automation, green energy, all of it boosts economic output enough that we grow out of the debt. It's possible. It's happened before after World War II, when debt levels were even higher than today. Growth solved the problem. The pessimistic scenario is stagflation: slow growth, high inflation, rising debt costs. Governments trapped between austerity that kills growth and borrowing that becomes unsustainable. Living standards stagnate, trust in institutions erodes, political instability follows. The catastrophic scenario is a sovereign debt crisis. Investors lose faith, bond markets freeze, governments can't borrow at reasonable rates. They're forced to cut spending drastically or print money recklessly. Either path leads to chaos. Argentina has lived through this. Greece went through a version of it in 2010. It's not theoretical. But here's what makes this different from past debt crises. In the past, when a country got into trouble, others could help: the IMF, the World Bank, wealthy nations bailing out struggling ones. But today, almost every major economy is heavily indebted. If the next crisis is global, who bails out everyone? There's another angle most people don't consider: intergenerational fairness. Every dollar borrowed today is a dollar that someone in the future has to pay back with interest. Kids being born right now inherit a share of $34 trillion in U.S. debt before they take their first breath. They didn't vote for the spending, they didn't benefit from the programs, but they'll spend their working lives paying for it. Is that fair? There's no easy answer, but it's a question worth sitting with. Here's the thing that keeps economists up at night. We've built a global financial system that depends on perpetual growth, not just growth, accelerating growth, because the debt keeps growing and the only way to manage it is to grow faster than it does. But what if we can't? What if we've hit some natural ceiling? Aging populations in most developed countries mean fewer workers. Climate change creates costs that don't generate economic returns. Productivity growth has been slowing for decades, despite all our technology. If growth stalls, the math doesn't work anymore. The machine breaks. And yet, we keep borrowing. The U.S. is on track to add another trillion to the debt every 100 days. Japan continues to issue bonds despite a debt ratio that should be impossible. Europe juggles austerity and stimulus, never quite committing to either. Why? Because stopping feels more dangerous than continuing. Because the political cost of saying no to voters today is higher than the economic cost of burdening voters tomorrow. Because we've built economies and political systems that require us to kick the can down the road. There's a term for this in behavioral economics: hyperbolic discounting. We value the present much more than the future, even when the future consequences are severe. Governments do this at scale. We all do it individually. It's human nature. But when entire nations do it, when the most powerful economies in history do it simultaneously, the stakes become existential. So here's the question we should probably be asking. Is this borrowing from the future actually sustainable, or are we just really good at pretending it is? Because if it's the latter, if we're all participating in a kind of collective denial, then at some point reality catches up. Math doesn't care about politics. Compound interest doesn't negotiate. And when that moment comes, the bill won't be theoretical anymore. It'll be real. And someone will have to pay it. The only question is who.